this right here was probably the biggest, in my personal opinion, one of the most anticipated books, the most anticipated books, simply due to the fact that here you have a big key, Batman #1, but you had it in the new CBCS label. And you also had that obviously for Marvel Comics #1. But the problem with this one is that this is a restored copy. So it's sort of, hard to really determine kind of a one-to-one comparison. It's restored. You never really know. Batman 1, obviously a lot more on the census, or a lot more prices to pull from. And this was in a CBCS 4.5. And as you guys see, sold for $180,000. Big number, but let's put that into perspective. We go down here. All right, we said it was a 4.5. Last 3.5, 90 days ago, sold for $228,000, and that was in a CGC label. A 2.5 a year ago in a CGC label, sold for $215,000. A 2.0 a year ago in a CGC label, sold for $176,500, which means effectively this Batman 1 in a CBCS 4.5 sold for the same price as a Batman 1 in a 2.0. Now, granted, corrections have come even here in the year of 2023. Corrections have come. This point in the year is different than the beginning of the year, but that is a pretty big difference. That's a large gap. And you would have thought that, a book like this, I mean, it's a good looking Batman 1. I think that this is probably a very accurately graded book, right? Presents really nice. Back's not too bad. A little bit of tanning here on the edges, but really, really solid copy. Now, it does have this little label note: cover reattached with archival tape. Now, I have got confirmation that doesn't mean that it's restored. If you crack this out and you send it to CGC, it would not get a restored label based on that note. But that's a big drop off for this book right here. So even though I'm of the opinion that the CBCS label does look better, I think it is objectively an improvement from the previous CBCS labels. And I think that's a good thing overall. Doesn't feel like the gap has closed. Doesn't feel like the gap has closed for CBCS yet. And it's still a long road ahead. But let me know what you guys think. Are you guys still feeling like, how are you guys feeling about these CBCS labels still? Have you guys settled in on them? You feel like they're cool now, or they're not cool? You guys like them? I like them. I actually saw this book in person. I went to Collector Summit in Dallas. I saw it in person. It's a nice looking book. I think the label looks good. I think they look really good. Would you be afraid to crack it out? I don't, if that's in reference to the Batman 1, I don't think so. I mean, because at this point, you have such an opportunity. You buy this for 180, you crack it out. Worst case scenario, comes back a CGC 3.5, right? And in that sense, a 3.5 sold for 228. So you have a pretty decent margin, wiggle room to play in there. Now, granted, you're going to pay a lot of taxes and fees. And then if you sell it again, you're going to pay more fees and things like that. So maybe you're going to break even-ish to get it in a CGC 3.5, but that's sort of the worst case scenario if you don't get a 4.5, or a 4.0. Maybe you get a 5.0, in CGC. So I think if you're like, I have a feeling like if you're one of the big dealers out there, you're a Red Hood, or you're a Reese's Comics, or you're somebody of that ilk, and you have a little bit of capital play, and you have the fortitude, and the chutzpah to play in that space and crack this out and go for resubmissions and stuff. I mean, it's probably worth doing it. I think you can definitely make a really good margin in that sense. We got to talk about Marvel Comics #1. Let me know what you guys thought about this one right here. This was the second major book that was in the session 1 that had the CBCS label. Now, again, Marvel Comics #1, a huge grail for a lot of people. Huge grail. This is a book that you really don't see that often. I know it's almost like a meme at this point, where it's like, you don't see this book that often. It's like, you eventually see every book, but you don't see this book that often. Marvel Comics #1, definitely a low grade, it's a reader copy. A lot of wear on the sides, a lot of wear down here. 2.5 restored. Amateur restoration includes moderate amount of pieces added to cover and first wrap reinforced, tear seals to cover, and first wrap cover cleaned. CBCS, new label here. This book sold for $144,000. Now, hard again to really make an accurate comparison with this book, right? Because it already doesn't sell that much. There's only 69 total graded on the census for this book. And you have to go all the way back to September of 2021, where you had a CGC 2.0 restored sell for $156,000. So this one had color touch, pieces added, tear seals, reinforced, tape on interior cover. Now, in a vacuum, I think this is probably a nicer looking copy, right? A little more saturated. I mean, again, we don't know. It could be the scans. Always hard to say. But even in this instance, here we are a couple years later, 156,000 to 144. The gap hasn't closed, guys. The gap has not closed between the CBCS label and the CGC label. Still a little bit of a difference. But again, still a great purchase. I mean, for 144,000, that's, essentially the cheapest anyone's been able to buy this book for the last 5 years, right? You have to go all the way back to 2018, where you had this 1.0 copy, blue label, sell for 56,000. I think that this person got a great deal. It's probably a good buy. I mean, first wrap completed, spin detached, cover detached, all that stuff, but technically a complete copy. I think that was probably a really, really good buy for this book at 52,000. So, the cheapest price this book is sold for, but, still very, very expensive. One other big sale from earlier in the day that I didn't talk about yet, that we, of course, need to talk about. We've been talking about the Batman ones, Subby ones, things like that. We got to talk about Superman #1, the 3.0, selling for $300,000. $100,000 a point for this first issue of the Superman run. Now, this book is not a bad 3.0, not the most colorful of Superman ones, right? Also, too, I don't know if this is a situation where maybe there was some resto removal. Does that seem like resto removal to you? I don't know, guys, but not a bad copy. Just not as yellow and bright as some of the other copies that we've seen before it. And for $300,000, maybe this one took a little bit of a haircut. I went to the barber. This book also went to the barber. Because the 3.0 earlier in the year sold for $360,000. But again, is this a better looking copy? No. In fact, actually, this is the same copy. This is the same copy that sold earlier. Interesting. Oh, wow. The story gets deeper. I didn't actually do my research here. This book sold for $360,000 at Heritage Auctions earlier in the year in June, going for $360,000. And this person had to sell their book, and they sold it for $300,000. Ooh, that's gotta hurt, guys. That's gotta hurt. You have to wonder what the idea with this was, right? When they decided to purchase this book, got a little overzealous. This is the same book, right? Yeah, it is. Okay. Got a little overzealous. Spent $360,000, and then realized I probably shouldn't have bought this. I probably shouldn't have bought this. And they had to auction it off again. I mean, not only that, but it's like you spent $360. You're also paying taxes on that. You're paying who knows what the shipping fees are for. I mean, at least $1,000, right? You got all that stuff going on, and then you sell it, and you're losing a little bit of margin here, on top of that. So that is a rough one. That is definitely a rough hit for that Superman #1 right there. And again, this is a book that's at one point, guys, Golden Auctions $720,000 for this copy right here. And this was on golden auctions. A lot of people were talking about when that Action One sold for like $1 million less. Everyone's like, oh, but it was on golden auction, so it doesn't count. It's like record and great here for Superman One is on golden auction. So, any given sale, guys, any given sale. So Soup One, again, kind of like Batman One, even though this book is extremely rare, Blue Label, only 74, much more rare than Batman One. Too many of these come into market. Again, I've talked about earlier in the stream. I think a lot of dealers bought these. A lot of people went crazy. A lot of turnover in these last couple of years with prices, and now things are getting pushed back out. Things are getting reshuffled, and that's why you've seen these books turn over. And here's a 1/8 that sold for essentially the same price. But again, buy the book, not the grade, right? Situation where it's like this is a much more saturated yellow cover compared to this one right here. I mean, maybe the scan is throwing this one off. I don't really know, but it's still Heritage Auction scan, so I have to imagine that this one looks better. I'd rather have this copy, right, than this one. So kind of, buy the book, not the grade. That's kind of why the prices are roughly the same. But I would say the Superman one, again, much like Batman one, much like Subby one, some of the superhero stuff that has seen enough sales have begun to kind of even out a little bit.